Hi everyone, I'm Paul Marden, and I run an agency called Carbon 6 Digital based in just outside London, and I wanted to talk to you today about a case study of a project that we've been doing over the last 18 months, 2 years, and really the reason, well, I'm here for two reasons. One, because at the UK festival last year, Pete Duncanson stood up and did a presentation about contributing to the community, and he said, you know, we're all involved in this community, but not everyone is really getting involved, and really you need to get off your arse and actually do something. And I got inspired by that to book myself. I went to Denver and I did this presentation in Denver. I've written a script article around it, really to try and put something back and start to contribute again. But the reason why I wanted to talk about a case study rather than kind of a deep technical presentation was because I don't think there's a lot of practical case studies actually talked about in meetups. So really what I wanted to look at is this project that we did for a company called Harwoods, who are a car dealership, and it's an intranet, and I'm going to go a little bit into the reasons behind why they engaged us, a little bit of the brief, talk a little bit about some of the functionality. I am going to put some slides with code up, but it's just a very light touch bit of code just to demonstrate that a lot of the integrations that we've done as part of this project were really quite simple to do, and actually, you know, the simplicity of Umbraco means that you can integrate with third-party systems really easily. So everything that I'm going to show is stuff that you would really do on the one-day kind of what we would have called the level 2 courses a couple of years ago. What I would say is that none of the code that I'm going to show is production ready. I've actually ripped loads of stuff out of it. So some of the code is around security and trying to improve the security of Umbraco, but you can't use the code that's on the board because it's not safe to. I've actually ripped out some of the stuff that makes it safe just to make it easier to demo. So Harwoods, the client that I'm going to talk about, they're a car dealership. They're based in the south of England. They only sell really, really expensive cars. So they only sell, the cheapest they'll sell you is an Audi, but they also sell Bentleys, Aston Martins, Rolls-Royce. So they're premium brands. They're fairly large. They're 800 people, and there's a mixture between sales, after-sales, servicing, and whilst they've been around for a very long time, they've experienced quite a rapid growth in the last 10 years, and so they were facing challenges around communicating with their internal team, and the intranet project that they kicked off with us was all about how do they engage their people and try and get them involved and make them feel part of a group. Many of the people that were working in the business felt they would feel an affinity for the brand they were selling for, but they wouldn't necessarily feel an affinity for the company that they were working for. So the people that maybe at Southampton Audi may not feel like they were part of the same group as the Bentley dealership in a different location. So the intranet that we built was all about trying to bring those people together. The reason why we were doing this, they had an intranet, and you'll see in a moment it was a bit tired. The barriers, the bar of success that we had to get over wasn't that high. They had this busy intranet already in existence, filter bursting with loads of content, but not a lot of functionality. And they were struggling to communicate this consistent vision around the group. One of the other things that you'll see when I talk about the security aspects of it is that they had a real proliferation of different systems, and the part of the intranet project was really a Trojan horse to introduce some unified security mechanisms to be able to improve the security of the proliferation of systems. And they also wanted to improve processes. They had loads and loads of business processes that were based on Word documents that would get emailed to somebody who would then check it, review it, and then send it to somebody else for approval, who would then send it to somebody else who would then actually key the data into a different system again. And they wanted to use the intranet to try and reduce the reliance on using Office and emails. So that was the homepage of the old intranet, so we didn't have to do a lot to get better than where it was, I don't think. So, yeah, the vision was to provide this central information and communication hub for the group. So our brief then, I'll talk a lot, I keep mentioning it throughout the presentation. Our job was to deliver a minimum viable product. We were not trying to deliver all of the functionality all in one go that would answer all of their problems. We really wanted to build the absolute barest minimum that we could get away with calling an intranet that had the functionality that they absolutely needed. We did some visual design. We looked at single sign-on across the IT estate, and that's kind of the bulk of what I'll talk about in a minute. We simplified their forms workflow using Umbraco forms, but I'm probably not going to talk much about that. And then we also provided a kind of centralized news portal, a social media hub, where their internal comms people could start actually pushing messaging out to their team. And there's a little bit of personalization as well. This is the second version of the current site. It's never going to set the world on fire in terms of the design, but what it was aiming for was something that was very, very simple to use and was in keeping with the existing design, because they've got a whole brand on their public website and all of their assets that they wanted following through into the intranet. And we've, as I say, it's the second version of this design that's just gone live, and it's trying to simplify and make it easier to find content than the version that we originally had. So one of the big jobs was about trying to simplify access into the intranet. They've got 800 people across multiple different brands doing different functions that resulted in about 45 different systems. So each person would have their own personal logins to 45 different systems, and you'd see them gaffer taped to the top of a monitor, or you would see them in a Word doc that they were trying to keep their passwords safe in. And what we didn't want was for the intranet to become the 46th set of credentials that you would have to remember. So we really wanted to provide a coherent single sign-on infrastructure. Now, we had experience of doing that for a previous client using something called SAML-based single sign-on, which is what I'm going to talk about in a minute. However, we couldn't do just a pure SAML implementation because 45 of the 46 systems didn't support SAML. So what we needed was a password vault type solution that integrated SAML into it. So has anyone in the room used SAML previously? Is anyone familiar with it? Wonderful. Okay, so SAML is an XML-based protocol for joining together the security of very loosely coupled systems. It's typically used in a corporate environment. So prior to running the agency, I worked 10 years in a corporate environment, and we used SAML quite extensively there, and I've seen it being used and being requested by other corporate clients. We don't see a lot of it happening outside of the corporate environment. Outside of corporate, you often see single sign-on being done with OAuth, but more often inside corporates using SAML. And in the SAML scenario, you've got the user's browser, you've got this concept of a service provider, so in this case our intranet was the service provider, and you've got this concept of an identity provider, which is the system that you trust for providing you with authentication and authorization rules. And we'll see in a moment, there's a number of different ways that you can go about this conversation between the client's browser, the service provider, and the identity provider. There is no interaction between the two ends of the relationship. All of the interaction happens between, by redirecting the browser to the different providers. We looked at a number of different ways that we could solve this problem. We looked at Active Directory federated services because the client already had a really big investment in Microsoft technology, and they had licenses for federated services, and it probably would have been the cheapest way for them to actually implement this single sign-on. But the issue we had with federated services was that actually neither we nor the client's IT service provider had any experience of actually setting up federated services. So we considered that kind of a high risk to the project. The alternative was to try and use some off-the-shelf SAML identity provider solution. And there were two that we looked at were LastPass and Okta. Both of them have great integration with Active Directory, so the clients, all of the 850 odd users that exist in the client's Active Directory can get squirted across to LastPass or Okta, automatically provisioning new users. Both of the systems provided a password vault, so passwords could be injected into all of the systems that didn't support SAML. And we had experience of integrating with both of them. They were proven solutions that didn't require us to know anything about having to set up and configure the identity provider. So we thought it really gave us the lower risk option. When we came to actually do the implementation, we had a long-term goal. We had a long-term goal to do automated member provisioning. So as soon as somebody arrived in Active Directory, they would get sent across to either LastPass or Okta, and then they would automatically get provisioned in Umbraco, so that the access to Umbraco was completely seamless. We wanted to do authentication, authorization, and also personalization. But that's the long-term aspiration. The minimum viable product was, could you go to Umbraco and log in using SAML? So in the MVP, all we've done is using the SAML assertion for authentication only. How do we go about doing it? Well, we used an off-the-shelf SAML API wrapper called Component Space. It's .NET based. It's fairly cheap to buy licenses for. It's developer based. It's not end user based. So we used Component Space. We'd used it on the previous project where we had done SAML integration as well. And initially we integrated with LastPass, and it all went fine. The SAML based integration works absolutely fine with Umbraco, SAML, talking to LastPass. But what we found was that the wonky system that Harwoods did use, which was the dealer management system where you buy your car and order it, and the order gets sent off to the manufacturer, that didn't actually work with LastPass. So it all had to get ripped out again, and instead we went with Okta. And actually, what you'll see later on is that we find time and time again that the coding aspect of doing this integration of SAML turns out to be really easy. Plugging it in and getting the configuration right to enable both systems to trust one another turns out to be a real pain in the backside. But it's easier in Okta than it is in LastPass, because Okta gives you a lot more rich information when it goes wrong. There's loads of debug information about why, what property it was that you were passing across to the identity provider that meant it couldn't trust Umbraco. But the job is actually quite simple. Once you get the configuration right, it's just a simple case of configuring Component Space, configuring Okta, and then creating a few bits of code in the Umbraco backend, which I'll look at now. I'm going to say it again. I have dumbed this down to try to make it easy to present and actually fit on one slide, because if I'd left all of the ifs and all of the validations in there, it wouldn't fit on one slide. Don't use it in production because it's not safe. There is, however, a script article which has got a little bit more in it, but is still not quite production ready. You need to roll your own based on what it is that I've done in the script article. So you've been warned. I'm also, I should say, somewhat of a gentleman amateur when it comes to coding. I do not do this every day. I mess around probably once or twice a month just to, enjoy myself. So please don't ask me lots of deep questions, because it worked when I wrote it. But I wasn't brave enough to actually do a live code demonstration. For the purposes of the demo site that I created, I built an Umbraco Cloud project, pulled it down to my local machine. I created Visual Studio solution around it. I added in Component Space, and then a couple of steps of configuration. So you need to register a root at startup, and then you also need to tell Component Space to load in the SAML configuration. The SAML configuration is actually quite simple. It tells each side of the relationship what information it needs to be able to trust one another. But there's quite a few permutations, and we've found, the very first project that we did was with a client whose SAML-based implementation was managed out of a team based a long way away from us, and we had no way of seeing what was going wrong when it broke. Similarly, when we did the integration with LastPass, you get no information when this configuration is wrong, so you're left kind of stabbing, trying to figure out what it is. Okta gave us much more rich information, and they also provide a little metadata file. What we did find towards the end of the project was a little demo code that's in component space, which will convert the metadata that gets provided by Okta into this configuration file, and then you're not stabbing around trying to guess which bit of configuration goes in which space, and actually it just works. So the code itself, we've got this assertion consumer service, which is the recipient of the assertion from the SAML identity provider. So in the scenario that I'm going to go through here, the user has gone to the identity provider, they've proven their identity, and then been redirected back to the intranet. All we do is pass the ASP.NET request object into component space. It does all of the job of actually parsing and understanding the assertion and checking that the assertion is safe, and then just gives us back the information that we need, which in this case, just for the sake of simplicity, I've just grabbed the username that was in the assertion, and then I asked the Umbraco membership service just to make sure that there is a member inside Umbraco that matches that username. Because they've proven their identity to the identity provider, I don't have to worry about who they are. I know that I can trust the assertion. So all I need to do, check that the member exists, and then set the authorization cookie. And in this case, I just redirect them back to the home page. There's richer ways of doing it to actually deep link them into parts of the intranet. But this is the absolute simplest use case. There is another use case, which is the one that I prefer, which is that people go to the homepage or a deep link into the intranet and are presented. I've not got a screenshot. They're presented with the login page that Umbraco would put on a protected piece of content. Instead of putting the username and password box in there, we put in there a link that will redirect you off to the identity provider. So in this scenario, it's called the service provider initiated single sign-on. So they go to the page, the home page. The home page is protected because it's an intranet. They say login via Okta. They get sent off to Okta. They prove their identity, and then they get sent back again. And that's the flow that I much prefer. But the code is ridiculously simple. It really is quite simple to get to this point. It needs embellishing. It needs things to validate to make sure that the assertion came back from an identity provider that you trust. Another thing that we're just in the process of doing is extending this so that it works in a multi-tenanted environment. So at the moment, this assumes that we've got one website where all of the members in the website are associated with one identity provider. But we've got a client that's just asked us to do a multi-tenanted solution. So they've got a training system where different clients exist in the membership part of Umbraco. Some clients will be members of one identity provider. Another set of clients will be members of a different identity provider. And so what we're going to be doing is redirecting the user to the correct identity provider. And when the assertion comes back, checking to make sure that the assertion has come from the identity provider that we expected that member to be associated with. But let me just, I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to do a demo, am I? So they've come to the home page, they do their login. they get redirected off to the identity provider where they prove who they are. And by the way, how you prove your identity is very much dependent on the identity provider. So in this scenario, Okta has been set up just to do usernames and passwords, but just like that, you can configure Okta to do two-factor authentication. But it very much depends on the identity provider that you're actually using. You go off, you get redirected back. I mean, it's kind of classic, member-based security on an Umbraco site. Sorry, I've lost my place. Okay. Next extension that we want to look at is to do automated provisioning, but that's actually quite simple, and I've demoed it inside the script article. At the moment, we do provisioning on the site just using standard Umbraco member creation. So we do ad hoc provisioning of new users just going into the members section, batch provisioning. If we've got large numbers of people, then we use CMS import to go and create all of those members. But we'd really quite like to do just-in-time member provisioning. So we don't create the member in Umbraco until they have proven their identity through the identity provider, been redirected back again. We find that the member doesn't exist in Umbraco, and we just create them because we trust the identity provider to have only given us people that are actually allowed to do, actually allowed access to the site. And in the very simplest case, we amended the assertion consumer service. So instead of having a failure if we couldn't find the member in Umbraco, then we use the member service just to create a new member. We actually don't care about what the password is because they're never going to use their password to log into Umbraco. And then we set the authorization cookie and log them in. In our MVP, we implemented authorization rules just using standard Umbraco member groups. So we set permissions on a page to be accessed by a given member group, and the members in the back end are managed so that managers can see one set of pages, technicians can see a different set of pages, people in Southampton can see a group of pages. So kind of standard classic membership management. And we manually do that in the members back end, but we've also, in conjunction with the guys at Visios, we created a little import tool that would let us import CSVs of member name to member group, just so that we could batch import that. In the long term, the SAML assertion can provide us with information about facts about the person. An Active Directory group could come through on the SAML assertion, and then we could assign an Umbraco member group to that person based on the assertion information, but we haven't got that far yet. So that was about addressing how do we improve user access. And the other feature that I want to go into is just talk about the news curation tool that we built. So the client really wanted to provide a really visually engaging source of news on the website so that people could go onto the intranet and find out information about their team, about their role. They really wanted to pull in external news that was relevant to the people, but also to push out internal news. But I don't know who's built an intranet here, but one of the real issues in any site, whether it's an intranet or a public-facing website, the content creation is a really challenging aspect of it. Trying to get a compelling set of content that's constantly being pushed out is really challenging. So what we wanted to do was create a tool effectively like Hootsuite for Umbraco, where you could have a single place in the Umbraco backend where you could pull together a load of social feeds and share the content back out as Umbraco content. And in the first instance, we've integrated it with Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and RSS feeds, and we're in the process of doing it with Instagram as well. And the net result is news articles that arrive on the web page, but I mean, news articles on a web page, there's nothing interesting about that. But actually, the back-end panel that we've built is essentially extending Skybred social package to be able to access the different various social media tools quite easily. And then we've built some custom trees and some Angular stuff to enable us to handle the processing of news items coming in and then the creation of content afterwards. And I'm not going to show any code for that because it's beyond me. But I am going to quickly show a demo of what it was that we managed to produce in the time that we had available to us. This one takes a little longer than the last one. So logging into the Umbraco backend, and yeah, it's an Umbraco site, but we've introduced this new section, the social feed section, and in there we've got new trees and social media channels that the editors want to subscribe to. So they can create as many RSS feeds or Facebook feeds or whatever it is that they want to pull in. So they add a it's going too fast. They add in an RSS feed. They can then see a series of RSS posts when they go into the back end. They can review the post to see if it's of relevance to them. And then if they're happy with it, they can then copy the content and it will pull it into a new Umbraco node. So we're not externally referencing out to the Umbraco site. To the original source of the news post. We're actually creating content. And the intent was not for the editors to copy and paste stuff, but to actually curate the content. They're not dragging everything in, they're only dragging in news that's relevant to them, and then making content changes to it so that it is relevant to them. Wherever we can, we pull as much information from the feed as we possibly can. So there's more information sometimes on a Facebook feed than there is on an RSS feed, and so we may be able to populate more parts of the news section based automatically on stuff that we've pulled through from the feed. And we also support the pulling in of media as well. So, you know, they might subscribe to the Jaguar Land Rover RSS feed where it's pushing out loads of new news about the latest Jag or the latest Aston, and we will create media items in the media library based on the information that was available to us in the feed, and then link that into the post that we create in Umbraco. Similarly with YouTube, we pull in links and embed links to the YouTube video, but give the editor loads of opportunity to be able to curate the content and add real value to what they're doing. So it's not just a copy and paste exercise. Because it's normal Umbraco content, they can set the content to publish when they're ready. So we've not tried to create anything. We're not trying to recreate anything that already exists in Umbraco. Hootsuite enabled you to post tweets based on stuff that you found from other people at specific times. Well, Umbraco can already do that, so we don't try and reinvent the wheel. We always try and keep a reference to the original post and the data that was in there, so that if there is ever a question of where did you find that, what did you do to it, have you plagiarized somebody else's content? To what extent have you reused content, and have you added real value, editorial value to it? So the security aspect of some of these mean that, for example, with the Facebook one, you've got to be OAuth authenticated to be able to actually see the posts, whereas it's much easier with the RSS feeds to be able to do this. So that's a quick potted example of what it was that we managed to produce. I'm going to go back and go to present mode. I know I'm the only thing between you and your lunch, so I'm going to accelerate at this point as fast as I can. The next steps, unusually for us, normally when we build stuff for clients, we grant the intellectual rights in everything that we produce to the client as soon as they pay us their money. So every piece of code we normally write belongs to the client at the end of it. But occasionally something like this will come along where we can see real value in the community, and we usually strike some sort of deal with the client to say we'll retain ownership and we'll license it to you. And this is one thing where we did keep the ownership. And we built it a year ago, but I've still got this aspiration of when we've got some spare time of actually packaging it up and putting it out. And It's in use at the moment. And the client really, the editing team, the content editing team really do love it. And but they did ask for this Instagram integration, so that's another step that we're just in the process of doing. Lastly, bringing those two things together, the SAML authentication and the news, what we really wanted to do was do personalization based on information that we pulled out of the SAML assertion. So the next release of the site that we're going to put out enables the editors to tag news posts in the social curation tool by brand, by location, by job role, and then we want to embellish the authentication exercise, as I said before, so that we associate SAML attributes with member groups and then can present news in a much more personalized way than we're able to at the moment. I am going to... we'll go into this. Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to do the conversion in my head of what time it is and what time we were due to finish. So another part of the site was about trying to reduce the reliance on email. So much of what the business was doing was transacted via email, and it was becoming burdensome for the managers and for the guys doing their work. And so one of the things that we wanted to introduce was a notification mechanism through the site. So when new news items are created in the news section, we can send notifications out to groups of users or to all of the users, and we can also do notifications on the basis of workflow events in Umbraco forms. So we've migrated a load of their Office-based Word doc forms into Umbraco forms, and then we've got workflow events inside Umbraco forms pushing stuff, notifications to users. It's a really simple data model that we created, a couple of tables that store notifications and associate them with members. We used Entity Framework to join it all together, and some very simple helper methods that put notification icons onto every page. But what we found is that actually it's not intrusive enough. It's not actually forcing people to do things because they're not getting a notification in their face. When stuff is sent out by email, their email is pinging and they're getting pop-up windows appearing. So plan A was to try to use HTML5 notifications, but there's inconsistent support for that across the different browsers that Harwoods actually use. And so we did look at a JavaScript web worker process. Again, it was inconsistent, so what we're currently planning on doing is implementing this in SignalR. So there's background processes running inside the browser, checking to see whether you've got any new notifications and popping those up on the screen. And then I'll show towards the back end, the next stage of the site that we're developing at the moment is a native mobile app wrapper for the intranet, essentially so that we can do push notifications out to phones. One thing I did want to talk about was the hosting that we did. The original plan was to host this on our own shared server on Amazon that we use. I can't believe it was December of last year I convinced the clients to move to Umbraco Cloud. Where are we, September? It's going to cut over next week after. We've had some issues in migrating. Most of those issues have been us not putting enough attention into actually doing the migration process from where we are to Umbraco Cloud. But we did have some issues in content. So when we migrated all of the content that was on our shared server up into Umbraco Cloud, we had a load of problems with broken links, with missing IDs, that stopped the site from stopped pages from rendering properly when you push the content up into Umbraco Cloud. So the clients had to go through quite a lot of pages. We had to identify every one of the pages in the site that had one of these broken links and then make the client go back and manually go and fix the job that they hadn't done right in the first place. And then we had to retest everything and establish that all of the custom code that we had written, because we've got some custom workflows and some custom data types in Umbraco Forms. We've got the social news curator, we've got the notification system. All of that we needed to test to make sure, in the context of Umbraco Cloud, that it would actually work the way we expected it to. We did find that there is good migration documentation to explain how you get a site from its current off-cloud hosting and up into Umbraco Cloud. We do this all of the time, inheriting an Umbraco site that has existed somewhere else with a different agency on different hosting, and the client wants to move it to our control. We do this time and again, and it's usually a case of getting the code, setting up a source code repository for it, testing everything, backing up the current site and moving the backups across during some sort of content freeze. And we know how to do it, and we can do it reliably, and we know how long it will take. It won't work in Umbraco Cloud because there's no way for us to back up and restore the Umbraco database. We've got to use Courier to be able to do that migration in. And essentially what we've got to do is delete all the content in the current test site, switch to a local connection, push the data back up again, and then hope that the issues that we've hit previously in doing that migration process don't repeat themselves. And I'm nervous about doing it, which is why actually it's taken us. We were due to push this into Umbraco Cloud in June, but because different people were on holiday and everyone was nervous about the process, we're kind of waiting until September and everyone was back in the office before we actually went ahead and did that. And then we're left with, how do we migrate all of the data that we've got in Umbraco Forms, which has been the mainstay of the functionality of the intranet, was to get them off of using Word docs and onto using Umbraco Forms. And actually, we don't have an easy and effective way of migrating the Umbraco Forms data. So actually, it's only a transactional workflow system. So we're going to bin the data that's on the old site in Umbraco Forms and start from scratch again in the new site. But there does seem a little bit of something that's lost there. So I mentioned the new developments that we're looking at the moment. We definitely want to increase awareness of the intranet. All of the managers are using it. They're using it really effectively because they've got no choice, because all of their bonus information is all held up in business information graphs that all surfaced in the homepage of the intranet. It's the very first thing the managers see when they go to the homepage. It's less of a reason for other guys to use it. And this is a story I've seen time and again on an intranet, that unless you give somebody a compelling reason to go to it, actually this stuff falls idle. There's got to be real functionality that you want to go and do. I mentioned I used to be in a corporate environment. I used to work 10 years at British Airways. The only way that we could book our cheap tickets was to go to the intranet. And in the process of going to the intranet, you got indoctrinated with all of the news that you would see as part of going onto an intranet homepage. But there was a really good reason why everybody wanted to go and use the intranet. If you don't give the guys a reason to do it, company news is not a compelling reason to go and actually look at an intranet site. So we've got to find a way of pushing it to them and actually getting into their attention. And so we're looking at developing native apps for iOS and Android, so that the guys can install it on their phones and essentially get access to push notifications on their phones. It is intended to be a really lightweight wrapper around the site. We prototyped it in iOS first. The complexity in this whole thing is that we really wanted integrated security using SAML. So this is, again, the code doesn't look that complicated, but there's not that many people who have used Okta who have done examples of SAML-based Okta integration in a native app. So that's where we're hitting issues at the moment. But once we've got that SAML assertion being held in the mobile app, we're just going to surface content from the site as normal site content, but just with a simplified template, simplified CSS template. And then to make the push notifications easier so that there's less work that has to happen inside Umbraco, we're going to be using and have tested and proven that we can use Amazon Simple Notification Service, which can then push out on push notifications either to Android or to iOS. So this is just a couple of screenshots. They do need a little bit of work done to them. It's not a thing of beauty yet. But the functionality is kind of coming along. The login button belies the fact that you still can't do SAML-based login, which is why there's no screenshot of that bit. But our intranet for Harwoods has got 3 distinct different home pages, one for general staff, one for people that are that are going through the induction journey, so actually starting at Harwoods, and then the onboarding process is a separate intranet again, presenting information for brand new starters once they come on their first day. So they'll log into the app, and people won't see all 3 of these. They'll probably see 1 or 2 of them at any point in time, and then it really is the app itself is a very lightweight wrapper at the top and the bottom. So the app is pulling some navigation information from Umbraco. It's providing ability to be able to navigate around the site, but critically, it's the push notifications in the top right-hand corner is really the only reason why we wanted to do a native app. And yeah, there you go. It's a push notification. It's not very interesting at the moment, but the principle works at the moment. So we delivered the MVP, deployed it across all of the sites. We've got 800 people on there. We're using e-forms for all new starters and leavers from the business. So that's a big chunk of the forms-based workflow that's being taken out straight away. In terms of the way that we engage with the client, the relationship has changed. We've gone from a fixed price agreement at the very start, where we delivered this MVP, and we've transitioned to a more agile retainer-based relationship with them. So we now deliver X number of days of work per month, and we've got a backlog, and we work through that backlog and deliver new features, and they prioritize those features as they see fit. I did want to mention, I've already said it before, but the slides are going to go up, and there's a link to the Scrift article, which goes into more depth about the stuff that I've talked about in terms of SAML. And then, just to please Niels, the client is absolutely super happy with Umbraco Forms. He loves it, and he has built some really complex Umbraco forms with optional sections. So when a new starter joins the business, depending on which department that they're going into, in which location and which brand, you'll see different systems that they can be selected to have access to. And he built them all himself, and he loves it. And he's not a developer, which is why he's technical, but he's not a developer. So yeah. He very quickly got up to speed, to the point of being able to do things where I kept saying to him, but you can't do that. And he would say, yes, I have. Here you go. There it works. There you go. Thank you very much. That's me. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yep.
So I'm wondering if there was any decision behind that, why you chose this over the other, or?
Yeah, SAML was basically based on the decision that their security advisors recommended that they go down, which is the thing that we keep seeing when we go into a corporate environment. They want to use SAML. So we've got another client, as I say, where we're doing multi-tenanted, where the decision to go down the route of using SAML is being dictated by their end client. It's not their technical decision. It is the security advisors of the end client. And depending on the size of the organization, the influence of the security advisors changes. You know, big organizations with reputations to protect have big and important security departments who then lay down technical guidelines and say, you will do that. Security using single sign-on, and you will do that using SAML. So it's that drives us to keep using this same solution. I think if you were going down the route of doing a site where you were doing lots of consumer-faced interaction, where you wanted consumers to be able to log into the system, then OAuth is definitely a better way of doing it. Letting them log in using their Google ID or Facebook is is a much more effective way of doing it. You wouldn't do a SAML-based integration for a consumer site because they won't have an identity provider that you can trust and configure. But if you're in that corporate environment, quite why the security advisors are making a decision to use SAML as opposed to using OAuth is a complexity beyond me. Any other questions? You all want lunch, don't you? This is not the worst slot I've done this talk. When I did it in Denver, I was after lunch, and that was a really terrible slot to get. So thank you. I'm very glad with the agenda. Thank you.